It's after 5 on the afternoon news. I'm Patty Handysides. And there's just less than a year before the Canadian government legalizes recreational use of marijuana. There's a lot of talk about selling it and smoking it. Where to do both? Well, there's a recent poll that shows Ontario residents favor private retailers over the likes of the LCBO, at least in Ontario. David Clement is the North American Affairs Manager for Consumer Choice Centre, which represents cannabis consumers in over 100 countries.
We commissioned a poll. So we at the Consumer Choice Centre commissioned a poll to figure out what Ontario residents think in regards to two major issues. So the first is where they can purchase legal marijuana when it is legalized. Some kind of provincial regulators or bodies had proposed the idea of selling through the LCBO. And so we asked that question: when marijuana is legalized, do you support having cannabis sold through private retailers as opposed to the LCBO? And actually, a majority of Ontarians do not want cannabis or marijuana to be sold through the LCBO. They prefer to have it sold through private retailers. And the second question we asked was their openness to lounges for consumption, so places where people can consume cannabis like you would alcohol for a bar. So what you would have is you'd have like a marijuana lounge that would be exclusively for consuming marijuana. And we actually found that more Ontarians support the idea of lounges than oppose them. So respondents were in favor of private retail as opposed to, let's say, the LCBO or government-run stores, and they're open to the idea of having businesses that are used for the purpose of consuming marijuana.
Was the answers to either of those surprising at all to you?
I think the answer to the private retailer question was not so surprising because people are becoming increasingly irritated with the LCBO and how alcohol is sold. So I think a lot of people see the problems with that system, and we don't want to replicate that. Openness to lounges was surprising, just because there's a strong kind of anti-indoor smoking bias. But I think that people realize that when you allow for lounges, you actually take people from smoking on the streets to smoking in these closed settings where they're not bothering other people. In the same way that like a bar for alcohol primarily stops people from roaming the streets and drinking because they have somewhere where they can actually go and consume the product. So openness to these lounges was surprising, but I was pleasantly surprised in terms of the positives that can have, not only for the economy, but also for the externalities of dealing with people smoking and things like that.
When it comes to selling marijuana, and so the survey shows that they're not in favor so much of LCBO, but private sale. Would that include drugstores? Because I know that's one of the things the Ontario government's looking at. Yeah,
so we didn't specify in terms of what a private retailer is. We didn't kind of delineate between let's say a Shoppers Drug Mart or a dispensary or a corner store or anything like that. We just wanted to see people's openness to the idea of private retail. So we didn't specify specifically, but based on my conversations with a lot of people who are concerned about this issue, they want a model that is as consumer friendly as possible. And what I mean by consumer friendly is a system that doesn't replicate what we have right now with alcohol, because a lot of people are very, like I said, irritated with that model, and we don't want to make those same mistakes. And so we didn't specify the variety of what private retail looks like, but from what we've seen so far, the people who are concerned about this just want something that's accessible and safe and consumer friendly.
Your group represents cannabis consumers around the world, and there's not that many places where recreational use of cannabis is legal. But what you're seeing, is that kind of the norm in other countries as well, that people would rather see it privately sold in stores or whatnot?
Yeah, and I think we're seeing more success in models where they roll this private sale model through. So if you look at somewhere like Colorado, where you have private sale and it's not kind of monopolized by the government, you actually have a system that does a lot better job of curbing the black market. which is for a lot of people who want to legalize marijuana, that's a huge selling feature, is that we're going to be able to curb the power of these criminal actors by taking it away from the black market and putting it into the legal market. So, yeah, we are seeing a lot of success from models that focus on this kind of private consumer-friendly approach as opposed to a centralized government approach.
In a place like Colorado, are there lounges allowed there where people can smoke?
Yes. So they do have accessible locations where people are allowed to consume the product indoors. And that actually, like I said just briefly ago, does allow for people to, rather than engage in smoking on the street and the smell and maybe the irritation of other people around you, it takes them from those outdoor public settings and puts them into a setting where people have consented to being around this product, just like people do with alcohol in bars or restaurants or clubs and things like that.
And that's David Clement, North American Affairs Manager for Consumer Choice Center, on their most recent consumer poll on cannabis sales that found a majority of Ontario residents would rather it be sold privately and not in something like the LCBO. But a lot of Ontario residents also believe there should be things like lounges, basically like bars for alcohol, where people can go congregate and go and smoke marijuana and be off the streets and not out in public doing it. Interesting indeed. There'll be many more studies to come. We'll be bringing you lots more information as we get closer to next July 1st, when the deadline, or self-imposed deadline, of the federal government has put on to legalize the recreational use of marijuana.